I think the ability to be physically active is huge for me because I loved that. I thrived on it. I was energetic. I was playing tennis. We played a lot of music. I played the piano. I had a good education, and I had really hoped to kind of make use of that and contributed something. And I feel that ability to do that was taken away.
That was Catherine. She didn't want to use her real name in this programme, but she's been living with ME since the 1990s.
I remember feeling this kind of burning anger that I was stuck with this illness that not only was there no treatment, but there was a lot of dismissal, disbelief. One friend said to me that I was really lucky to have so much time to rest. I didn't want to rest, I wanted to live.
And this is Jo. She's had ME for 23 years.
It's 9 a.m. and my husband David has brought me a cup of tea in bed so that I can take my morning meds and wait for pain relief to kick in. Most people think ME CFS is about being a bit tired, but there are so many symptoms that you can never be quite sure what you're in for.
You can hear how both Jo and Catherine's lives are ruled by this disease. ME is also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And today on the Inside Health podcast with me, James Gallagher, we're going to delve into the latest science trying to explain what's going wrong in the body and hopes to one day reverse it. We'll hear from Jo and Catherine again, as well as from world-leading researchers, and we're joined in the studio by Sir Stephen Holgate from the University of Southampton, who is chair of the UK ME Research Collaborative from 2013 to 2020. Stephen, welcome to Inside Health.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, first of all then, Stephen, ME/CFS, what is it?
Well, to be absolutely frank, we do not know what it is because it may not be a single condition. That's the first thing to say. But it's characterized by very powerful symptoms. Chronic fatigue is one of the most powerful symptoms, both physically and mentally. And then they have pain, they may get allergic disease, bowel dysfunction, headaches, and most of all, they have difficulty in functioning in everyday life. So a complex disorder with multiple interacting components.
Stephen, take a listen to this. This is Jo describing the impact that ME has had on her life.
For me, stomach issues and nausea are a constant companion. Monday is shower day, and like every activity in my carefully curated routine, I have to plan it. So I can only shower once a week. The rest of my time, I rely on personal wipes or a quick wash in the sink.
Stephen, ME can profoundly affect people's lives, can't it?
Indeed it can, yes. I think the important thing here is that every function that a human being does in everyday living becomes an effort. And I think this is the thing that really invades people who have ME, invades their lives. And it's important to understand that it fluctuates. So some days are good and some days are bad. But for some patients, they have it all the time. And about a quarter of patients are housebound as a result of all of this. And many are even bedbound.
You mentioned some of the symptoms earlier from the fatigue element, but also the stomach issues, the pain, aches, difficulty sleeping, etc. Does that give us any hint as to what's going on in the body?
Well, I think it does tell us what's going on because having defined now much more clearly what the characteristic symptoms are, I think we can start to believe that some of the pathways that are involved in maintaining the body's integrated function, that is, joining things together functions, both in the brain and in the body itself, that's what's gone wrong. It's not a single component, it's the way everything's put together. And therefore it's lack of energy, it's lack of ability to be able to coordinate thinking, it's lack of sleep. So the whole timetable, the way the human body functions as a whole, becomes disrupted.
I want you to listen to Jo and then Catherine on how they cope with ME/chronic fatigue syndrome.
It's Tuesday. Tuesday is one of the days I work, and that means a quiet few hours on my laptop on the couch. Almost enforced physical rest. No radio or TV. I say physical rest because mental and emotional energy over expenditure can lead to a crash too.
I've learnt to pace. because actually it's the only thing that I have found has given me a relatively stable level of health.
Joe and Catherine both there describing being constrained really in everything that they can do. They have to know what their limits are and stay well within them.
Indeed so, and that is very characteristic of this group of symptoms. It really narrows the life because every time they exceed that boundary, they develop these symptoms which stop them from going further. And so they learn to narrow their life activities around a set of functions that they can cope with.
And this, Stephen, is from Jo and is what happens if she pushes too far.
It's Wednesday. My payback, or post-exertional malaise, is still bad from overexerting on Monday, and I feel exhausted. My worst days are lost days. The days I can't wake up. My brain and tongue in glue so I can barely speak. I can't open the curtain because the light hurts my eyes. No TV or radio because the sounds pierce my brain and cause physical pain.
Stephen, post-exertional malaise that Jo mentioned there, what is that?
So the malaise is a crash where the whole system seems to actually break down whenever they pass a certain threshold of activity, whether it be mental activity or whether it be physical activity. And that can last up to many days and sometimes weeks, where they become bedbound and immobile. It's a very characteristic symptom of ME.
Can you describe for me, Stephen, the arc almost of this disease? Because I can remember headlines describing this as yuppie flu. Like it was completely dismissed by the medical community. It doesn't quite feel like we're in the same position now, but some of that doubt and dismissal still lingers. What's your kind of like take on that journey?
That was a very difficult journey for patients because this disease became labelled either as a psychological or a psychiatric disorder, and therefore it was all in the mind. And this profoundly upset patients who obviously realised that they had the very physical side of the disorder to cope with, let alone the mental one. But that's the way it sat, and it was really harnessed around ignorance of what could be driving this.
Well, Stephen, let's start drilling down now into some of the science of what might be going on here, because there has been some recent work that has been really quite interesting. But let's start with where we think ME might start, because many people report that they had infections at the beginning of their first symptoms appearing. Here's Catherine.
1993 was when I had 3 viruses in a row. I had a patch on my lung that wouldn't go away. I was on multiple courses of antibiotics, but my health just seemed to gradually slide. That continued for about another 18 months. And then I got another virus, which was like a flu, and that absolutely wiped me out to the point where I was at my sickest. I couldn't stand up for very long. My digestion was all wrong. I had terrible night sweats. My sleep was all over the place. And I just felt ill. Really ill.
Stephen, is Catherine's experience common?
It is common. Over 80% of patients who present with these symptoms of ME often say it all began following a virus infection. They may not know what the virus was, but they describe the symptoms of a virus infection. And glandular fever probably being one of the commonest ones, but many other viruses as well. And obviously viruses can set up an immune response, and that's where the research is now being directed towards.
This is really crucial, isn't it? When we get sick, we all might feel wiped out for a couple of days or weeks, but we expect to make a full recovery. So in some ways, it does at times feel almost controversial to say we might have symptoms that last for years. But Rosemary Boyton, a professor of immunology and respiratory medicine at Imperial College London, says it's a pattern that we see over and over again.
This whole concept about an infectious disease, an acute infectious disease, causing persistent symptoms several months or even years after the original infection is not a concept that's unique to ME. It's a concept that's not new. There are several viruses that are linked to persistent symptoms and even bacteria. For example, H1N1 flu, chikungunya virus in Brazil, SARS-CoV-2, obviously, in long COVID. So this is a concept that's been going on in lots of different infection processes. I think long COVID has provided an opportunity because before March 2020, April 2020, the global population hadn't been exposed to this virus. Now almost everybody in the world has been exposed to it, and a large number of people have been vaccinated against this virus. You've got a unique starting point, which means that you can have comparators of before and after March 2020 in terms of samples and data analysis. You don't have that with ME. Often people can't pinpoint exactly what virus or what infection may have led to the start of the disease.
Stephen, I found that really interesting what Rosemary was describing there, how long COVID was a really big turning point for quite a lot of these different diseases that seem to come after a whole host of different infections.
This was the first time there had been a really crystalline knowledge created around an event leading to this post-viral syndrome we've been talking about. And that's why it's so important. Not only that, of course, so many people got SARS-CoV-2 infection that this post-viral syndrome increased the number of ME-like syndrome patients enormously around the world and put a credibility then on the whole thing that was not existing previously.
Was it a moment of acceptance for ME?
It was. And of course, it didn't come suddenly because the long COVID, as you've been describing, is something that's been accumulating over time since we had COVID-19 and is continuing. But the symptoms, up to 60% of long COVID patients have symptoms very, very similar to that of ME.
Stephen, do you find it interesting? Because I certainly do, how we think of something like Lyme disease, which we know is caused by an infection and cause prolonged symptoms. We've got ME/chronic fatigue syndrome. We've got long COVID. There are long flus. There are other infections that all cause these same symptoms. And you look at it collectively and you just go, oh, God, infections really do this to the human body. But it's almost like each one of those has been individually dismissed as just being in people's heads.
Correct. And this has been the big problem. And so each one of those has been studied in its own isolated way, but it hasn't been seen as a post-viral syndrome. And I think this is the thing really that long COVID brought to the equation, that there's a seriousness of the biology now that's going to be investigated, and we're going to find out causes as a result of this.
So Stephen Holgate, thank you. And do stick around, because today on Inside Health, we're trying to get to grips with the latest scientific understanding of ME. So far, we've heard how long COVID led to strong evidence that infections can cause these lingering symptoms. But now I want to turn to another really interesting piece of research, a project called DecodeMe. It's been analysing the DNA, so that's the genetic code, of people with ME to see if some of us are born more susceptible. Lead researcher Professor Chris Ponting told me what they found.
What we've done is like develop a treasure map. We found in DecodeMe there are 8 different places across our chromosomes that on average are different between people with ME. So we need to ask others to go ahead and dig for the treasure to find out what it is these genetic differences mean. So there are 2 main signals that come through in general. And the first is that the nervous system seems to be a strong contributor, and the immune system also contributes. What we are not saying is that there is a single gene or a single letter change in our DNA that absolutely would tell us whether or not someone has ME or not. It is about slight changes in risk as to whether someone will have an ME diagnosis.
What does it mean if you're carrying any of these areas of your genetic code that predispose you to a higher risk of ME? How certain is it that you would then get ME?
It's a small shift in the relative likelihood of someone having ME or not. And the value really isn't that we can go to the individual and tell them whether they have ME or not. The value comes from us, I think, in this project, lighting a path down which the field of ME can now travel. They know now where to begin to look for these causal genes. And that is incredibly helpful, I think, in a disease such as ME, which has not been believed by many people and previously has not had robust concrete evidence as to what are the systems that are going wrong in it.
Both Catherine and Joe, who've been hearing from throughout this programme, took part in the DecodeMe research project. This is what it meant to them to find out there was a genetic link.
You feel kind of vindicated. You know, I have not been making it up all these years. So yes, you do feel vindicated and immensely grateful to the researchers for kind of going with it, because I think in years past loads of people have been put off research, having been told you don't want to go down that path because it's psychological. It's not a real illness in inverted commas.
We aren't surprised by the results at all. It feels like a big fat told you so. GWAS studies, that's genome-wide association studies, have been the foundations for huge leaps forward in lots of diseases over the last few years. But we know it's only a start, the very first step, and that now other researchers need to take the results and go hunting for the cause, for the process, for the biomarker and possible treatments.
It's not a coincidence that Joe and Catherine, who we've been talking to, are both women. Most people with ME are. I wanted to know if Chris's research had led to any clues that could explain why.
5 out of 6 of people in our study were female, and it's tremendously biased. And it obviously provokes this question: what is it that makes women more likely to have ME? When we look at the genetics, we see nothing. We see no significant difference between the genetics of females versus males. When we look at the blood molecules, we see no difference between females and males, despite the fact that many things are different between people with ME and others. It's a huge mystery, but it is a mystery, however, that needs to be solved.
You're listening to Inside Health with me, James Gallagher. So, Stephen Holgate, you're still here in the studio with me as we navigate this new science of ME. So, Stephen, we heard Chris describing the genetic component of this disease. How important a discovery was that?
This was the most important, I would say, transformative study in the history of this whole complex group of disorders. 27,500 people in the United Kingdom came together around this particular disorder, offering their saliva and having their genes looked at. What it told us is that there is a definite biological set of drivers for this group of conditions, that they involved the neurological system, the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, but also the immune system as well. And these were the breakthroughs that we were desperately needed to be found. Because prior to that, there really were no substantial, what we call biomarkers of this condition. And so this has been the big breakthrough, I would say, of the century.
And Stephen, you'll know that many people often struggle to get their ME diagnosed in the first place. This is what happened to Joe.
I was first diagnosed with post-viral fatigue syndrome in 2002. I was 28, fairly active, and working in finance. I had picked up some unnamed virus on holiday in Tenerife and slept for about 36 hours. After that, I started to periodically need time off work, slowly but progressively taking more and more time off over the next 10 years, so I pressed my then GP to look at the pattern with this cluster of symptoms and refer me. Reluctantly, he did, to the infectious diseases unit at the Western General, where a Greek locum was just like, oh yeah, this is very obviously CFS.
People struggle to get a diagnosis, don't they, Stephen?
They certainly do.
How do doctors get there?
Part of the problem is believing patients. In fact, a survey just 10 years ago said that about half of general practitioners in this country didn't believe that this was a condition that existed as a disease entity. But I think we're beyond that now, and there's strict definitions now about what ME is. I think the important thing is to make sure that primary care physicians and specialists are fully trained in the knowledge of this new way of thinking about ME, and in this case, long COVID as well, and to start beginning to attach significance much more to what patients are saying than they have done previously.
Okay, I want to talk to Professor Rosemary Boyton again. She's just started the Rosetta Stone study, which is looking for similarities and differences between long COVID patients, ME patients, and healthy people.
So there'll be a very nice and rich data set about the symptoms that the individuals have. What we'll then also be doing is taking a blood sample, a fecal sample, and also a saliva sample to try and understand the underlying mechanisms that might be driving these persistent symptoms in these individuals. Other things we'll be looking at will be things like gut microbiome. And what I suspect we'll find, because I think people have already found some differences like this, is that there'll be some species in the microbiome that are either reduced in abundance or increased in abundance. So what you could see is a link between a change in a gut microbiome, a linking to a change in a metabolism, linking to a change in the way that impacts on how the cells in the immune system respond, which relates to how that then regulates things within the body, which basically causes symptoms.
It was interesting hearing Rosemary saying that they're looking inside our digestive systems at the good and bad bacteria that might be growing inside there, because so many different things have been connected with ME. Is the microbiome, as it's called, one of them?
Yes. And I think, again, this emphasizes it's a multi-system disorder, a dysregulation of multiple systems. So in my own world of allergy, people with ME develop increased allergic disease because their immune system has been tilted in that direction. The gut, because the mucosal barrier starts to break down, they start to develop gastrointestinal symptoms and so on.
Is the immune system the critical player?
The immune system, I think, is a major player because it's the thing that defends us from the outside world. It keeps us intact. And if that in some way either becomes overactive or inadequately active, then obviously what goes on around us can invade us and cause problems. And I think the immune system is connected then with the structural cells that are involved in our brains and in our nervous system, because these two things are finely tuned. And as a result of being finely tuned, if one goes wrong, then the other can go wrong as well.
And what about something else that you sometimes hear, that whatever that initial viral trigger may have been is somehow lingering and is never properly cleared by the body, and it's actually like a continuous infection?
Yes, I think that is a possibility. Or even one virus sort of reactivating another. And we're very familiar with that, with herpes, for example, the chickenpox virus being reactivated. But some of the other viruses that are lay dormant, sometimes for years, can be reactivated. And certainly patients with ME have evidence that Epstein-Barr virus, which is associated with glandular fever, can be reactivated when they have these virus infections. So, yes, I think that's definitely on the cards.
Stephen, thank you so much, because I know there's a lot to try to bring all together there. Let's hear again from Rosemary, because I think she really nicely describes the challenges of when you are trying to diagnose somebody with ME at the moment, and you can't just look at a blood sample and go, you have it, you don't.
If you've got a disease where you haven't got a specific thing where you can do a test and say, yep, that's it, I think it's this disease, it's much harder for clinicians to confidently say, I think this is long COVID or this is ME, without any kind of specific test or biomarker. And I think the disease that I would compare it to most is lupus, actually, because lupus is a multi-system disease, more commonly affects women, very hard to diagnose if you didn't have tests to do, but actually we do have a set of autoantibody tests in the case of lupus. We can tick the boxes and get the results back and then feel a bit more confident about what's actually going on. And I think one of the things that it might be possible, although I don't know yet, to achieve is a set of things that fall together that could be used to understand that someone has got persistent symptoms secondary to this type of disease process. There might be no obvious cause, but if it's got a common pathway, then you'll have some way to explain why this individual feels as sick as they do.
It's Thursday, and today, after 2 days of mental effort, I'm shifting my focus away from screens and brain drain back to moving around a bit more with some light chores and pottering. As usual, I wake up feeling like I haven't slept at all and have to fight the urge to go back to sleep. There are no treatments for ME, never mind a cure.
Stephen, why isn't there a cure for ME? I mean, it's what Joe would like.
And it's what all of us would like. The problem is we do not know the underlying causes of this condition yet. Lots of clues now bubbling to the surface, and I'm sure the Rosetta Stone study will come up with other clues. But once we have a hook to hang new therapeutics on, then we're on our way. And out there's going to be loads of drugs that presumably we could repurpose into this condition if only we knew where to target the therapies.
Why do you think that we just didn't see the pattern across multiple diseases until long COVID?
Because I think medicine has become increasingly siloed. I mean, I think that's what's happened in the last 50 years, really. Everyone's a specialist in their own disease areas and not a specialist in everything. So in a way, what happened is everyone's got their own tranches of work, but they're not communicating.
It's Friday, but we'll need to rest if I am to attempt to do it all again next week. I anticipate being unable to get dressed and spending the weekend alternately on the sofa or in bed, just like every weekend.
Stephen, there's so much going on in chronic fatigue syndrome now, probably more than there has been for a very long time in researching this disease. Do you think we're at a moment of potentially having a breakthrough in this that is actually meaningful for patients?
I genuinely think we are coming to a point now where the biology, the understanding the biology, the processes behind this group of conditions is actually making sense. What we do need to do is come together as scientists, not only across this country, but across the world, joining forces so that we use every possible bit of scientific ingenuity to get behind this, to offer patients the chance of a future.
Stephen, thank you so much for holding our hand through this today. It's been greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been my absolute pleasure.
And thank you for listening to the Inside Health podcast with me, James Gallagher. The producer was Alice Lipscomb-Southwell, with research by Tom Hunt. Technical production was by Donald McDonald. The show was made by the BBC's Audio Science Unit in collaboration with the Open University, and the Open University's myth-busting quiz is back. To test your health knowledge, visit bbc.co.uk/insidehealth and follow the links to the Open University.